Hello, friends. How are you all? Today we are going to read the news from the Indian Express. The U.S. India relationship complicated, but at the end of the day, we will come together, says U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. U.S. India trade relations on the day 50% tariffs on India goods imported into the US took effect. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that the India US relationship is a complicated one, but added that he believed that at the end of the day, the two countries will come together. Speaking to television news channel Fox Business, Besant suggested that the recent unease in relationship between in New Delhi and Washington was not just due to India's hefty purchase of Russian oil, but also the delay in the two countries reaching a trade agreement. This has complicated relationship between Trump and Prime Minister Modi. Have a very good relationship at that level. It's not just over the Russian oil. The Indians came in early after Liberation Day to start negotiating on tariffs, and we will don't have a deal. I thought we would have a deal in May or June. I thought India could be one of the earlier deals, and the kind of tapped us along in terms of the negotiations. And then there is also the aspect of Russian crude purchases, which they have been profiteering, profiteering, profiteering on. Bessent said there is a many levels going on here. I do think India, the world's largest democracy, the US, and the world's largest economy. I think the end of the day we will come together. I think a lot of it by Indians has been performative. I have I have said it all along during the tariff negotiations. The US is the deficit country where there is a schism in trade relations. The deficit country is at an advantage. It's the surplus country that should worry. So the Indians are selling to us. They have very much tariffs, and we have very large deficit with them. The US Treasury Secretary added. Commerce Ministry officials said the communication lines with the US have not been served, and that the ministry is in touch with the industry to explore all possibilities to soften the impact of tariffs. Notably, US negotiators were expected to come to India on August 25th for talks to conclude the trade deal. However, the talks were called off after US President Donald Trump announced 50% tariffs on India on August 6th. India US trade deal negotiations had started in February earlier this year, soon after Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited Washington. Both leaders had announced plans to sign a bilateral trade agreement by the end of the year. India and US had also signed the terms of reference for the trade deal, but India's stance to maintain protection for the market access for agriculture and mid-sized vehicles has created differences between trade negotiators. Indian Indian refiners' hefty imports of Russian crude have surfaced as a major irritant for the Trump administration. Earlier in August, Trump announced an additional 25% tariff over the above the 25% tariff announced on Indian goods last month as a penalty for India's Russian oil imports, the cumulative 50% US tariff on Indian goods took effect on Wednesday. New Delhi has called the targeting of India over the purchase of Russian oil unjustified and unreasonable, and said these imports began as its traditional supplies were diverted to Europe, with the US having actively encouraged such as imports by India for strengthening global energy markets stability. Moreover, Washington has also been frustrated over the protracted trade deal negotiations with New Delhi, given that India was initially seen as one of the front runners for trade pact with US. India's stiff resistance to American demands of greater access to country's farm and dairy sectors are among the major roadblocks in negotiations. The renewed pressure from the US and other Western powers pressuring India to cut down on imports from Russia and evidently aimed at forcing the Kremlin's hand into ending the Ukraine war. For Trump, who wants the 3-year-old Russian Ukraine war to end within days, this is an opportune opportune time to pressure India over its Russian imports, given the long drawn out trade pact negotiations between New Delhi and Washington have been hit by impediments. Russia is currently the largest source of crude oil for India, accounting for 35 to 40% of New Delhi's oil imports, notably, while Trump has slapped additional tariffs on India as a penalty for us buying Russian crude. It has not taken any such action so far against China, the top buyers of Moscow's oil. Bessent also said that the US could use more assistance from Europe on pressuring India over its Russian oil imports, given that much of the refined petroleum products exported by India to Europe. Our European allies need to step up. I don't see them threatening the tariffs on Indians. As a matter of fact, they are the ones buying the refined products that's made from Russian oil. Bessent said, adding that only Canada was willing to join the US in applying secondary tariffs to pressure countries like India. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, Moscow's share in New Delhi oil imports was less than 2%, with much of the West shunning Russian crude following the invasion. Russia began offering discounts on its oil to willing buyers. Indian refiners were quick to avail of the opportunity, leading to Russia, earlier a peripheral supplier of oil to India, emerging as India's biggest source of crude within matter of months, displacing the traditional West Asian suppliers. Notably, India was encouraged by the US to buy more Russian oil, as Washington did not want that oil to go off the market, as would lead that would lead to surge in energy prices globally. India public sector India's public sector refiners have publicly stated that they have not received any directive or indication from the government with respect to their Russian oil imports and their strategy on buying Moscow's crude continues to be indicated by the economic and commercial consideration. The Indian government continues to maintain the country will buy oil from wherever it gets the best deal. As long as the oil is not under sanctions, Russian oil is not under sanctions and is only subject to a price cap imposed by the US and its allies that applies if Western shipping and insurance services are used for transporting the oil. Indian refiners and government maintain maintain that they have been adhering to the price cap on Russian oil. On being asked if he was worried that India is going to do trade using the rupee instead of dollar with the BRICS countries, Bessent said, "There are a lot of things I worry about. The rupee becoming a reserve currency, it isn't one of them. I think the rupee is near an all-time low versus the US dollar." Thank you for watching.